Among those who call themselves Christians, there is all kind of angst out there about this thing that we call dating and our kids dating. In this episode of the Christian Home and Family Podcast, I want to explain to you why our kids have not dated, why we've not allowed that, and how we accomplished it. This isn't a prescription for everyone, but it's definitely something that worked for us, and I want to encourage. Well, welcome to the Christian Home and Family Podcast. My name is Carey Green. I'm a retired pastor who's now doing a lot of things online primarily, doing business, podcast production, doing podcasting myself, as you can obviously tell. And I'm also serving as a marriage and family coach here through Christian Home and Family. And this particular episode of the podcast is not about dating versus courtship, so you can relax. Doesn't that feel good? This post is about the wisdom or lack of wisdom that is inherent in the cultural practices of dating that go on all around us, and what can be done about it in our families as believers in Jesus Christ. See, when my oldest son, who's now 26, was very small, my wife and I prayerfully decided that our children would not date in the typical sense of that word. Our experiences had not been all that great when it came to dating, and we knew that there had to be a better way for a Christ-centered family to go about the whole thing of kids getting involved in relationships with people of the opposite sex. Now, before I tell you how we accomplished that in a way that all our children have willingly and even joyfully adopted, let me tell you why we made that decision. So the reasons we didn't want our kids to date are important. There were maybe 4 of them that I'm going to outline for you here. First of all, pairing up as couples really only has one purpose, and that's to head toward marriage. We really believe that. There's no other reason for a young man and a young woman to pair up. Think it through. At what age is a young man or young woman actually ready to be seriously heading toward marriage? 12 years old? 16? 18? What do you think? You absolutely must answer that question well if you're going to think about this issue well. When we allow 11 or 12-year-olds, or many times even 15 and 16-year-olds for that matter, to pair up, it's premature. They're not yet of marrying age, so why would we allow them into a context where everything is pushing them toward marriage, or at the very least, deeper relationship than they are able to handle? They aren't ready for it. So it's foolish of us as parents to allow it. Now, we can talk about it in ways that prepare them for what's ahead, and we should. But we don't have to throw them into dating in order for them to learn about healthy relationships with people of the opposite sex. Secondly, romantic relationships require a tremendous amount of maturity and emotional self-control in order to be healthy. Even adults have a hard time handling the emotions that come with a committed relationship. And there are vital, mature skills needed in order to make a one-on-one relationship like dating work. Things like deep communication, consideration of the other person, insight into human nature, commitment to high moral standards, etc., etc. It goes on and on. How many preteen or teenaged kids do you know who have those skills? For that matter, how many adults have those skills? Why would we put our children into a relationship for which they're not yet prepared? When we do that, failure is the only logical outcome, and by the grace of God, that doesn't always happen. But there's also pain that happens in that emotional context that doesn't need to happen. Instead of putting our kids in the dating meat grinder, why don't we use that time to build good character into them? Why don't we help them think biblically and maturely about important things like marriage, relationships, and family? I think that goes a lot further than the alternative of dating. Thirdly, Dating places far too much sexual temptation on the soul of a child who's not ready to bear it. And you know as well as I do, our culture sexualizes everything. Dating most of all. From the moment a couple pairs up, the pressure is on to hold hands, to get physically close, to kiss, to touch each other's bodies, and everything that naturally follows. It's unhealthy, and it's unwise to put children into that environment. So think it through. Here are some questions that you might want to consider. Is this child ready for the responsibility of having their own child? Is this couple ready for the responsibility of a family? If not, then dating, I think, is a bad idea, and we should reconsider whether that's absolutely healthy. Number 4, dating encourages emotionalism that can easily cloud sound godly judgment. Now, every Christian parent wants their child to marry a person who loves Jesus and is impacted by their personal walk with him. But how many times does that happen in the normal dating scene? I would say very seldom. Here's an example of what happens instead. Let's just say a young lady is allowed to get involved with a young man who's not all that the parents hope. He's probably not even all the young lady hoped. But he's paying attention to her. He's saying sweet nothings. He's making her feel special. And it's hard for her to think about all the things he's not, because she feels too many warm fuzzies to let herself consider those kinds of logical matters. This thing could happen with a young man just as easily as with a young woman. I've seen it in counseling and pastoral ministry countless times. And what has happened in that situation? What's really going on? There isn't enough spiritual and emotional maturity developed yet. They don't have a chance of stepping back, of considering reality and making a godly decision, especially in a culture that tells them relationships of this type are all about the feelings. And dating sets that up. It makes it the most likely outcome, and that's dangerous. And I believe as wise, Christ-following parents, we shouldn't have any part in that. So those are some of the more vital reasons that we decided that our children would not date. To us, it seemed like inviting a hungry lion into a sheepfold, and we wanted our little lambs to live to see the day that they had the opportunity to raise their own little flocks. So how did we accomplish our children happily not dating? Let's talk about that in the second section of this episode. We'll be back with part 2 of this episode, so please don't go away. You know, one of the ways that people discover the Christian Home and Family podcast is through the podcast directories like iTunes or Stitcher. But those directories rank podcasts based on how many subscribers they have. So if you could pause this audio right now and go to your favorite podcast directory, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and subscribe to the Christian Home and Family podcast, you could help other families find this podcast more easily. Now let's get back to the episode. Okay, so how did we accomplish our children being happy about not dating? Well, it's not as hard as you might think. And I have to put in a caveat here, unless you've waited too long to get started with this process. If you have older children and you regret that you allowed dating to begin in the first place, you're going to have a much harder time retracting that decision because your kids are already emotionally invested in it, like we talked about before. But there's still hope. We'll talk about that at the very end. But here are the things that we did to accomplish our children happily not dating, is the only way I can say it. Number 1, we started young. When our children were old enough to understand that there were such things as girls and boys, we began talking about the wonderful differences that God has created by making male and female people. We began explaining the way a man and a woman come together in marriage to create a family, and we began telling them how much the Lord loves marriage. Part of that was that we began talking about how a man and woman come to be in love, how they have to be mature, healthy, grown up enough to love and take care of the needs of another person. We'd even talk about how far our children were from being ready for that responsibility. I mean, we just laid it all out there. And without fail, they saw it just as clearly as we did and had no desire to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, no matter how cute it might be at a young age, to encourage that sort of thing. Secondly, we continued that conversation. When our kids were 8, 9, 10, 11, we began talking about dating itself, mostly through discussing what we observed going on around them. We pointed out teen couples and asked our children what they thought. We asked them if they thought it was wise for a couple who's not old enough or mature enough to get married to pair up like that. And without hesitation, they would say no. You see, they began to see for themselves that dating early on is really kind of a silly thing. Thirdly, we introduced our plan. So before we started talking about dating alternatives, we first talked about what it takes to be a good companion: maturity, selflessness, wisdom, self-control, willingness to serve, desire to care for another person. What we were doing is we were helping our children see that before they'd be ready to pair up, they need to be well on their way in those kinds of areas, in their own character and in their own life. From there, we told them we didn't think it was wise for them to date at all until they were of an age that they could do something about it, actually get married. They saw it the same way, and they agreed to it with no problem. Then fourthly, we watched carefully what was going on in their lives and in their hearts, and we continued to talk. You see, all of our discussion and planning didn't prevent crushes and puppy love from showing up in our home. It wasn't long before one of our kids got asked out or to be somebody's girlfriend or boyfriend. And let me pause here for a second to say this. If you've not been consistently pursuing your children with good communication up until this point, this is where they may try to hide things from you. If so, I just have to be honest and say, man, you're in for it. The early years of your relationship with your children establish that healthy groundwork of communication that's needed for the teen years. So if you still have young children in the home, you have got to work at developing closeness with them all the way along. Don't wait until the teen years and then expect that you're going to be able to pull off a healthy dating policy. You're going to get serious pushback. And when those emotions get all involved, like we talked about earlier, man, it can get really ugly. So getting back to my description, we didn't allow those crushes and invitations from potential significant others to go underground. We talked about them. We asked the child what they liked about the person. We asked if they felt warm inside or happy inside when they were with them. We wanted our kids to know that we understood what they were feeling. But we also asked them again if they were ready for marriage. We asked them if they were ready to love the other person the way that a committed relationship requires. And this helped them see that what they were feeling was only feelings, not a true gauge of their readiness. Then we'd remind them, this is why we decided that you wouldn't date, remember? And they did remember. And we'd move ahead in unity. But we'd continue to talk almost daily sometimes, as long as we knew the feelings of attraction were still there. And typically, it wasn't long until the feelings went away and they were once again happily non-dating. It was actually kind of funny. By the time our kids were 14 or 15, they were saying to us and to others with great conviction the very things that we'd said to them about dating. So what happened when they were old enough to date? The story's been told many times about what happened when my oldest son met his future wife. We tell it in our family quite often. He was 19 at the time. He'd be going to a weekly Western kind of dance at a camp near where we live because one of his friends' dads ran the camp. And so one Thursday evening, when he and his sister, who's 2 years younger than him, were getting ready to go to this dance, she said in our hearing, "Did you tell Mom and Dad about Hannah?" man, you better believe we stepped through that door. We asked him all about Hannah. Who's Hannah? And he told us about this cute redhead that he'd met the week before. But he didn't seem as excited as I expected. So I asked him, do you like her? Do you think she might be a person that you would marry? And he said, yeah, maybe. And that's when I said the infamous phrase that he's repeated many times to other people. And he said he was shocked when he heard this. I said to him, what are you going to do about it? He said that's when he realized that I believed he was ready. You see, it mattered to him that I thought he was mature enough to pursue a loving relationship with a young woman, and that he would do it well. And you know what? He has. He's 26 years old. He has 3 little grandboys that are just, oh man, it's painful. It's painful how cute they are and how much you can love a little kid like that. And his wife, Hannah, has just fit into our family so well. Now, I don't tell you any of our story to boast. I tell you hoping that it will give you hope, especially if you have younger children still in the home. You have the opportunity to put in the hard work to develop the relationship and the communication that will enable you to walk this kind of a path that avoids the pitfalls of dating as our culture practices it. Now, I promised also a few words of counsel or hope for those of you who are further along. My best advice to you, if your kids are already dating and you wish you had made different decisions, is this. Sit down with your kids and have an honest conversation. Tell them the mistake you think you've made. I mean, you have to confess you're wrong if you think you've done wrong by them. You have to tell them you wish you had made different decisions, and maybe listen to this episode of the podcast together and explain to them why you think you've made some bad decisions, and help them see the wisdom that you've come to see. They may be willing, if they're extra humble kind of a teenage kid, to step back and come under your authority in this area in a new way and decide not to date. But I don't suspect that's what's going to happen in most cases. I think you're going to have to walk that path with them, asking them for an increased amount of communication between you as the parent and them about their dating relationship. They're going to have to consent to that. You can ask and you can encourage and you can keep going forward as best you can. But I'm telling you, if you can get on the same page with them, if you can appeal to them that you want to help them do this well, things will go much, much better. And I am praying that anyone who's hearing the sound of my voice and has made mistakes in this area will receive the grace of God to experience something different, to experience something new and fresh that perhaps you haven't experienced before, and that God would have mercy and grace to help you in this great time of need. It's my hope that episode was a blessing and encouragement to you as you endeavor to lead your family to express radical faith in our Lord Jesus Christ. If you would do me the favor of going to the description area for this episode in your podcast player or app, or going to christianhomeandfamily.com/subscribe and subscribing to this podcast, that will help us rank higher in iTunes and get more people exposed to the message of radical faith for generations. I hope you'll join me again for the Christian Home and Family Podcast.